Good afternoon, evening, everyone. So this is March 16th. This is the meeting of the Select Board. Tonight's meeting will be conducted on the Zoom platform and live streamed on Cohasset 143 TV and Cohasset's Facebook page. The public is invited to participate on the Zoom platform, which can be accessed using the link provided at the top of the posted agenda for tonight's meeting. Members of the board and other scheduled participants will be able to participate when called on by the chair. Board members will be able to ask questions of any participant. All votes taken at this meeting will be by roll call. Members of the public who wish to ask questions are asked to raise their virtual hand on Zoom, and at the discretion of the chair will be promoted into the meeting. Members must provide their full name and address for the public record. Please note that comments on platforms other than Zoom will not be monitored. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Cohasset 143 TV. Let's do roll call right now. Mr. Evans, would you like to go first?
Everyone's here. Already present.
Diane Kennedy here. Jean Healy Default here.
Mr. Craig is on, I just promoted him, Mr. Casey for the second.
Okay. Hey,
Jack Brayton here.
okay, great. Why don't we all stand for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Okay, it is 6:34. First item is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment? Anyone on?
I do not see the hands.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, which are major capital projects to be presented and proposed financing for annual town meeting and town election. So this item relates to, I think, the select board needing to start the discussion, given the upcoming deadlines that we have on the warrant for thinking through the varieties of projects that we have that have been lingering out there. I provided folks with a summary of the infrastructure projects that we have been talking about at varying times, at varying moments, and given the process that we have, I think it would be important for us to try to start having these discussions at the select board level. Diane and I did attend the long-term financial planning or Cohasset financial planning meeting this morning, and we got a lot of good feedback, which I'm happy to provide now, and Diane certainly weigh in, but that's sort of the background. We have a variety of things, and just so the public knows, some of the projects that we've been thinking through include fields and recreation, and we're going to have a presentation on the scope of that later. We've had one last week, but this relates to the projects relating to the tennis courts, to Deer Hill Fields, and other potential smaller items that may be out there. We also know that there's a request out there from the School Facilities Committee with respect to a feasibility study. And we also know that there are school capital improvements that are lingering out there too. We also have a need, I think, to think through at least sidewalks, what we want to do on that front, roads potentially as well too. We know, again, I added it for completeness, we have a public safety issue that I think, question we're trying to address with respect to our police and fire station. And we know that there's been a request for a $200,000 feasibility study for that building. And finally, we know town hall. We heard town hall last week. There's links to the plans and the presentation. We know that that amount is projected to be at approximately 22 million. So that's sort of where we stand. I don't know if we want to take one at a time or if someone has views that they just want to present generally.
Take a swing. I mean, so I think that it makes a lot of sense
we learned about the special stabilization fund, and we heard from the schools about what their request is. Considering that, I think the stabilization funds allows us to get ahead of the funding discussion while also developing the how we deploy that funding, kind of in two separate ways. So I think it's the perfect example. It's a perfect way to give the schools what they need and then let the school facilities committee, the school committee jointly decide how they want to spend that money. If we're gonna establish special stabilization fund for them for $1.5 million or $2 million, do they want to use it on the feasibility study? Do they want to use it on some high priority changes? We can open that money up for them with a ballot vote now, and then they can come back at the next town meeting, which could be in 6 months, with the way they want to deploy that. I think that process makes a lot of sense.
So you're suggesting that we fund it now, but then we appropriate it or spend it once there's been more discussion?
Well, that's the special stabilization fund that we got presented on from Jennifer. Am I kind of overviewing that process correctly, where we would, in this round, go for the article and then the ballot question to create the fund, and then in order for the school facilities or the school committee to spend that fund, we'd have to have a warrant article to go to the next town meeting, correct? Yeah, so it's kind of this 1-2 stage. I love that process. I think it makes a lot of sense because it gives people the security that, this is what this money is going to be for. We're not spending the money yet, and before we spend the money, you're going to be able to have some feedback on what we do. So I think that there's no reason not to start that immediately. On the, in kind of whatever, do we have to figure out how much that is? I mean, I think we got a list of things, but I'd like some feedback on kind of how much would be reasonable. Public safety, I think if we can fund that out of free cash or ARPA or whatever, that's to me priority one. So I'd like to do that quickly, in any way, shape, or form. And then I think town hall and fields and rec, I think this final field study proposal, I mean, I know, thank you, Michelle, thank you to you, Vice Chair Keely Dibble, for kind of taking all the needs and bringing them down. I think what you have here is the concentrated version of what needs to be done. So I think combining that with town hall in a funding package or in a exclusion package is the way we get both those things done. So that would be I'm ready for that step myself.
So similarly, I think there are two separate approaches. One, creating a special stabilization would be a separate vote at an election. So that particular vehicle for funding wouldn't be packaged with the others. But I'm at the point now where, we have to start doing some projects in this town. Somebody at our meeting earlier today, and I wrote it down, and I won't attribute it because I don't remember who said it, but it just said we have to start getting, it might have been Eugene, getting away from deferring projects. Because the longer we push things off, especially when it comes to maintenance or, upkeep, the more in debt we're gonna become, and the harder it's gonna be to solve some of these challenges. So one of the questions I have, it might be a Chris question or a Jennifer question, is if we were to create a special stabilization fund, for example, for schools, for maintenance or however they might seek to spend it, will that take it out of what would our action have to be at town meeting in terms of what they've already been before capital budget on? So is that going to free up room in the capital budget discussion if this is over here, because this special municipal fund is a completely separate vehicle from the capital stabilization fund? Does that make sense?
Because your point, we don't want to just transfer vehicles, right? We actually want to get something.
Because I mean, theoretically, the conversation over the last couple of months has been, capital budget has looked at it, and we've looked at some of these things that we need this for that and this for this and this for that. And if we are carving out some of this and putting it into a different funding vehicle, then we need to kind of figure out, we're going to address what's over on this side of things.
Yes, I think you can get somewhat general or somewhat as specific as you all want. So you could set something up as a capital facility, a school facility stabilization fund. So a capital school facility stabilization fund, which could encompass a lot of different things. It could encompass any type of maintenance on the school buildings that you need. That it could take some things out of the capital plan if they're already in there. It could be saving up for a feasibility study when MSBA actually, approves Cohasset. So there are a lot of things that you can do with it, and I think that is going to create more discussion on how you want to actually, use these funds, but you can set it up somewhat generally. So if you had a number that you wanted to go to town meeting with and then go to the ballot, we would move that money into a capital facility, a capital school facility fund. That money would sit there until everybody agreed that, okay, we're gonna take this amount out for this project. Now, if it's something that's in the 10-year capital plan, then yes, that would free up the capital plan.
It's a policy decision.
Right, but because we're not even spending it till, town meeting in, let's say, the fall,
Well, would,
that would give us an opportunity to plan a backfill.
Yeah, and Madam Vice Chair, my understanding is that after it is put in the stabilization fund, it is not dispersed until the select board disperses it. So the reason I like this particular method is that we show that the money is there. We intend to spend it. We're not ignoring whatever constituency. In this case, it's the schools. And we're starting to fund it. And then that allows them to know that there's funding available. So when they start planning on how they're going to spend it, they have the assurance that the money is there. But I do believe, I think in our previous discussion, it was mentioned that it requires select board approval to disperse. Is that correct?
No, so the way it works, and maybe this is where we should have started just as a sort of repeat, is that the special stabilization fund, we would vote to put it on the warrant and the ballot, and then town meeting would need to approve the funding mechanism. And then it would be funded at the initial amount that we suggest, assuming it passes at the ballot, then that money is sitting there almost like an escrow account for that particular purpose. And then we would have to put a separate article on the warrant for town meeting to then spend the money out of the fund for whatever that particular purpose is. And then when we get to next year, we have to go through, as a select board, to keep the funding level or to decrease it, or to increase it by 2.5. But we can't vote to spend it. Town meeting still has to vote to spend it. And I would suggest too, that we probably need to have policies and governance in place, that we would still go through the same process that we go through with capital, including as it relates to appropriations coming out of the special stabilization fund, because we do have some items on the 10-year capital plan. We have an additional plan that now has been created through the new AI3 facilities report. And so on one hand, the intent is to free up some pressure off of the capital stabilization fund, but it's also to get the school the extra that they need to start chipping away at some of this deferred maintenance. So it's not saying, oh, hey, let's take the 500 the capital would have spent and just let the school spend it, because then they're not getting anything extra. It's
right, we have to
just
be sure that
funded.
we carve that and we have good coverage.
Good.
Well phrased.
And I think we can work through that, but
Should be additive, but not.
Right.
replacing.
Right.
yeah, because these extra items are things that would have otherwise hit the capital stabilization fund in the future, and we know or should know that they just don't have a realistic capacity. It just will squeeze them more and more. If that makes sense.
Can I ask a clarification? Just, and I believe I have this right, but we'd have to have the ballot. We couldn't do funding or a use of the funds synchronously, sure? Sure, simultaneously, there we go. Synchronicity, please solve my head. At the same time, so we have to pass the creation of the fund and then wait till special town meeting to have the articles that would then expend that fund. We couldn't do them at the same time.
That came up actually this morning in our
Okay.
meeting, and I really need to dig a little bit deeper
It's a
into
little
that.
awkward if we try to do it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
You kind of pre-funding it, and then if it sits there, unless it's a real immediate, like emergency need, at least it's sitting in the stabilization fund for a few months, gaining market value.
Okay.
But if we were going to do it all in one, town meeting, would it be contingent on because you're voting it out of the stabilization fund, but then
Before, yeah, exactly.
you're not putting it in yet because it has to go to the ballot, but I'd have to get a clarification from DOR.
Just,
Yeah, no, it's a good question though.
Yes, Paul.
So just my clarification, is this a singular fund that we're gonna vote in, and then we break it up? Say, for instance, school improvement, sidewalk, public safety,
My suggestion would be that we would create separate funds for separate purposes.
I would agree with that.
That was my question, just for clarification, is, could we do a special purpose capital stabilization fund this way? Or is that could be anything, or is that basically defeating the purpose of the word special stabilization fund? In other words, so that we would be creating separate, something maybe for school capital projects, something separate for another.
Yeah,
purpose.
you could do a special purpose capital stabilization fund. It would be for any capital purpose. Could be that general.
You
Although
could do multiple.
you could do multiple, or you could probably do one. I think when I was looking at other communities, they had one. I think the issue here, if you do one, you have so many different needs from different areas, right? But yeah, you could do that.
on the sidewalk thing, I think we're just based on what your leadership, what your group comes out with, but I do think it's worth thinking about whether we want to, I mean, a special stabilization fund does seem like something which does have a little bit of a temporary kind of nature to it. I mean, as it automatically winds down, all those things. So when it comes to sidewalk, if we're going to say, well, this is an ongoing thing, we're going to make it a priority every year to do something. Maybe that's something that we, maybe not this time, but we talk about an actual override. And I believe we can carve out overrides for certain purposes. Is that correct? So we can say there's going to be a $500,000 override that we're asking for only for sidewalks. We can carve that out. That way it's unlike the special stabilization fund where we have to go back to approval. It's always carved out. And then, your group and then DPW can, that'll just be carved out in their budget. I mean, that may be for something that's such an ongoing need, a little more effective. It just,
Well, I just want to, so when you catch up, I think one of the purposes of this fund is when you catch up eventually, sidewalks last a really long time, right? If they're built right. So once you catch up, you're not gonna put sidewalk on every street, I wouldn't expect in class, right? So at some point you catch up, and at that point you figure out a mechanism, we're not talking about it overnight. At that point, you build something into the budget a little more regularly, maybe put some money aside at that point. And you could potentially wind a fund like this down, because you've built the sidewalks you need, and then we're kind of just been maintaining it. Same thing with roads, right? I mean, roads, we try to get them every 20 years, I think. So, that said, there's an ongoing need for repairs, but sidewalks, I think the purpose of it is a degree of flexibility. Sure.
Although to Cora's point, I think it might be helpful to have a consistent funding source outside of capital stabilization as to, because once you hit the 20 years, then you restart the next 20. And so you're always,
it's never going down. It's never stopping.
if you want to be in like a maintenance mode, I think, well, you have to do maintenance. This is why we're at the place we're at, because we haven't kept up on that cycle that we need to. And so on one hand, the override is permanent, and this is not necessarily permanent. And so there's flexibility in terms of, if we started at a place higher and trail downwards, we don't have the flexibility with the other permanent.
Especially for anything that's not going away. I think for schools, there's clearly catch up, and then there will be a discussion about coming down the road, what the big plan will be. So the schools does feel a little more temporary catch up, and then choose how big of a bite of the apple we're actually going to take in 5 years, couple of years.
I think the beauty of this whole that when we've been addressing a lot of this about who gets what of the pie, because there's a lot of money that needs to be spent. And people will say, well, I want this project, and somebody else says, I want this project. Well, and it's not really fair to fund one in advance of the other. And that starts chewing up our ability to fund our overall capital funding ability. So this allows us to start allocation. And these are going to be very, very difficult decisions the town is going to have to make. how do you balance the schools or town hall with roads and sidewalks and fields? So I think it's a very good step to start handling that.
To that point, I think that's why we're kind of in agreement of breaking up the funds into separate accounts or separate. As Gene has suggested, and I'd say with the roads and sidewalks, I think our big hits. Are gonna be in the next few years, and it does go, probably a cyclical maintenance schedule. As it rotates around. My comment. Cost of living, but I think the cost will start to go down. After we fix it's broken, it needs to be replaced. Then it will go to an ongoing maintenance schedule as you would, any kind of repair. I do think that the cost will go down. It will cycle down as according to financial rates at the time. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make an important distinction between a general override and a special purpose stabilization fund funding mechanism, which is an override, is that a general override, when that gets, obviously, both of them get added to your base, but that gets added to your base and you have to use it specifically for that purpose for the first year. After that, it just gets rolled into your budget and you're not required to use it for that purpose year after
Oh,
year.
so we can, so it's only once, we can't carve that out and say this is a,
No, you really have to pay attention to it, because I've seen this happen in over 10 years. Hey, whatever happened to that override?
Yeah.
Because it got built into the budget, right?
gotcha.
So a special purpose stabilization fund, you have the flexibility. It only goes away if you decide to have it go away, but it has to be used for that purpose. So it's in that fund for that
Mhm.
purpose.
I have a question just about, if we were to do a stabilization fund, a capital special stabilization fund for sidewalks. And would we include roads in that? Would we broaden that? And how would that be balanced against the regular road budget? Would it have to be for a specific road project? Because one of the things we've talked at our previous meetings is that, we may not have the staff or get off a list to actually execute on some of these projects right away, which is actually good, because then we can build up some money. But the question is, what happens to the regular road budget? And if we have the stabilization fund, would it be the same thing? Like, well, we don't have a sidewalk project to do this year, but we want to go forward and enhance our road budget by X.
I think if you did roads and sidewalks, it gives you more flexibility. I mean, you do have the chapter 90 funding for roads. But also too, I think it gives you the opportunity when you're doing a major project, say you're ripping up the road for a water main and you're like, we have to repave this, but we also want to put in a sidewalk, right? So then you're not trying to split that out, but it does give you that flexibility. And you can still, roads, there's always a demand for money for roads. So it's really going to be the amount that you're going to decide to put in the fund.
Well, also too, if we said, we're gonna put the 300 that we spend right now, capital stabilization fund into a roads and sidewalk stabilization fund, in addition to whatever we decide for sidewalks. We're freeing up pressure on capital, and so in theory, that should give capital more room to address the other capital needs. But if there's some unexpected, let's say we do I'm just throwing a number out there, 500 for roads and sidewalks, but we really need more. In theory, we should have a little more cushion, whether through capital stabilization or free cash, to try to help stream that versus what Jennifer says is, ultimately being jammed every year, which we are.
Right, the question is, like, some of this is in the operating budget as annual costs, some of it is potentially in this special stabilization fund. So is it additive, or are we,
Right, those,
where's the,
Yeah.
I hate to use the word backfill because that just sounds terrible, but that's the only word I'm thinking of.
You might want to, just a suggestion is have a discussion with Brian Joyce for a recommendation on the funding mechanism. So this is what we're looking at, right? And so how much what can you do? What should go here, and how much they've been given, I think, for the capital plan. He asked for $1 million, but I think that they funded around 300,000. So do you want that 300,000 to go away from the capital plan to ease up the capital plan? right? And then also, well, what are you getting in chapter 90? So it's a good discussion to have with Brian and try to get a recommendation from him of, okay, if you put this aside every year, this is what we can do in addition to chapter 90. And did you want me not to go back to the capital committee to?
We could also ask capital budget, that if we free up 300, what more can you do than capital with the remaining requests that you have to say no to?
Right, but again, the challenge is we know we need $1 million worth of road work a year,
Yeah,
and we're only funding 300 in the operating budget. And if we remove that over here, it's not additive to the point we were discussing earlier with the schools.
Correct, because then that fund just displaces money that's going to be spent somewhere else. Like if there's always going to be free, and
Right.
if there's going to be competing for resources. One question, and this is completely off the wall, creative. Can we tie it to like a match? Can we say, you know, this fund will only be used to be a 2-for-1 match that's coming out of the capital stabilization fund? So we ensure that there's always some buy-in within the budget. And this is just kind of gets us, you know, we'd like to go 1 foot, this gets us 3 feet. But then it kind of naturally winds it down because the capital budget says, well, we only want to spend, again, I'm just throwing over $50,000 on projects, then we're only taking the $100,000 out of the fund then. And I wonder if,
You could have a policy with the fund,
okay, policy.
you know, and I think that might be a good way to, you know, address that issue.
Yeah.
You know, and have everybody look at it and have some buy-in, but yeah, I think it would be through a policy that the select board would
It's
vote.
a very CPC suggestion.
Oh, yes. Well, it's like fundraising, to you know, remember candidates, how you make $1, how you make $5, right?
And Vice Chair, taking comments from the public on this.
Oh, yes, Brian, I'm sorry, I got someone wrong.
No, all I was gonna say is I think that, you know, we also have to talk to our friends and neighbors about this, and, you know, the whole point of this discussion, because it is asking for more money, is because we know we need to play catch up. So, you know, it shouldn't be a shell game, it should be we have deferred so many projects and so much maintenance. At the same time, we only have the capacity to complete certain projects on certain timelines. So we want to make this kind of injection, this, you know, to fundraising thing. This is kind of the catalyst to get us going and get us a little further along. And then in 3 to 5 years, we're going to see how this plays out in terms of how our operating budget's functioning, where we're able to catch up, and then whether or not we need to sustain these stabilization funds.
Paul, and then if you can promote Brian, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. You have 2 questions. One for Mr. Hose, one from Mr. Davis.
Great, okay.
No, I think to be back on your point, I think most of the towns where we're kind of at an inflection point, be my understanding. I think that we'd be met quite a bit of approval. I would push for more PR. You know, work out a campaign, let people know what we're doing, why we need to do it. You know, I ventured to say that we might get some positive feedback or something like that.
Okay.
You know, parents are being honest, let them know that the towns, we've deferred maintenance for a long period of time. And when they start seeing some shovel-ready projects, if they start seeing this, I think we'll get quite a positive reaction when they start seeing things getting done.
Mr. Host, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I just want to share a couple of data points that might help you.
Oh, we can barely hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now, yep.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to share a couple of data points. So I absolutely want to second Diane's point that this should absolutely not be a shell game. I think it's important to know, you know, where the funds are coming from and going to. But let me start at the highest level. We are going to be facing, on best estimates today, we're going to be facing about $1 million a year for the next few years, plus inflation going forward in terms of our annual road costs, including sidewalks. And that excludes sort of massive projects that just assumes sort of a 20-year replacement cycle of what's in place, plus some moderate investment on the sidewalks. What's being funded today in total, well, I should say what's been funded historically over the past 5 years has been between $500,000 and $550,000 per year. So it's going to double, right? the funding source has been $300,000 coming from capital budget, plus, roughly $200,000 a year coming from Chapter 90 funds. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less in terms of the Chapter 90, but the capital funds have been set at 300. Okay, so there are two issues around this beyond the doubling. The first is the $300,000 a year that has been provided by capital over the past 5 years was a new cost that we picked up back around 2018, 2017. But we also never received any incremental funding in terms of an appropriation to make that spend. So that $300,000 has effectively created a crowding effect on all the other budgets that you would have seen in pre-capital involvement in roads. So as you look forward, you look at this special fund. I guess I'd start by saying, I'm pretty ambivalent in terms of funding structure, because whether you run this through the capital stabilization fund, or whether you run it through a special purpose fund, you have to spend $1 million in total. That's just the reality of it. I do think there's a benefit to having it carved out so that it's not competing, and is not perceived to be competing with any other capital request, because it's really not competing. It's just money that comes right off the top. We have to do this. And you really can't delay it because it just piles up. In terms of how much would continue to be funded out of capital. I would tell you, we didn't have the money to fund this in the first place. We took, a good run at making it fit, and then it doubled, and it obviously now no longer fits. So in order to achieve, true, I think, relief of the pressure on the capital stabilization fund, the best approach is to pull it back out. There wasn't room for it in the first place. And not surprisingly, this is a number that we're wrestling with, roughly $300,000 or $400,000 of important requests that probably don't fit, that probably would if roads and sidewalks weren't in there. So I just share that with you. I think if you're going to do a stabilization fund, the easiest way to do it is just pull roads out of capital. Recognize that money is going to get absorbed by legitimate requests from other departments, and fund the whole road and sidewalk program out of this special tax, which is really what it is. It's not going to, this clearly, I don't think anyone's talking about funding this out of the levy. So I guess those would be my comments.
Good history. Thanks, Brian.
Hey, Justin, did you say there was another comment out there?
Yes. Mike Dick has a question on put up on the screen, and I'll read it out loud.
Okay.
Okay, this is Mike Dick, capital budget. We should define temporary tax increases as a truly temporary increase, an increase that has a definite sunset date. At the end of the increase period, the tax rate goes back down and doesn't roll into another increase period. Debt exclusion tax increases are essentially permanent once the increase rolls into another use.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Mr. Dick. And I think that's something that we can consider as we get to the policy aspect of how we want to approach the stabilization fund. So I think on a related note, I put some financial notes down there just to refresh all of our recollections based on the presentation that Jennifer provided us back on February 28th that we again saw this morning at Long-Term Financial. As we think about how much, including the bigger debt exclusion projects that are out there. So we do all of these numbers based on the average median assessment in Cohasset, which is 950. And so that's what all the data is based on. So for $21 million in debt exclusions, that would be a tax increase of $398.96 a year during the life of that debt exclusion. So i.e. 30 years. But keep in mind that a debt exclusion, it gets smaller over time. So it rolls off as the number decreases. For $63 million in exclusions, that would be a tax increase of $1,196.88 a year. And again, that's $63 million in projects in total. So that would be a 10% increase in taxes if we were to do $63 million in exclusions. And, you know, one of the things that came up in long-term financial this morning that Mr. Dick brought up is what is the capacity of the Cohasset taxpayer to absorb tax increases? Right? Is it 10%? Is it 63 million in projects in total? Is it another number? Like, how do we gauge that? And that is a hard question to know because different people, you know, have different tolerances. And it may change based on the project as well. But
Could I tee off that a little bit?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a good policy question because, you know, do we, the one thing I worry about is by establishing that high number, you know, you always say work expands full time allotted, you know, people will find ways to spend money. So I am a little bit worried about doing something which puts a cap on it because there'll be pressure to set the cap high enough we can do everything. But I think that also disadvantages us for cost savings along the way. So I'd rather, I've thought about this, so and I can be convinced otherwise, but right now I'd rather just say, okay, right now we have $25 million of stuff that's ready to go that we need to identify and we got to move on it. As things come up, we need to have those other numbers aware, but things are going to change in the town too. Economy, growth, you know, there's a bunch of stuff that can happen. So 5 years down the line, we may have a different opinion about a lot of things. So for me, I'm more comfortable just hitting what we know, making it as tight as possible, and then we deal with the next step when the next step comes.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I look at it like, I feel like we're not looking to raise anybody's taxes. We do not want to do that. We have projects that we have to address. We have, you know, buildings that need to be replaced or renovated or whatever. We know we have a need for fields. We know we have needs for, you know, I'm not gonna go there, but for roads and sidewalks and that kind of, it's more like we are taxing people because we have needs, not because we want to.
We're taxing ourselves.
Right, right, we're taxing ourselves, by the way. So I think it's less, sure, there's a breaking point, as you said, for everybody, where it's like, forget it, but our job, I think, our responsibility is to only ask to cover what we need. And we have spent a couple of years in the last couple of months in a very intensive way, identifying some really specific needs in the community that I think we have an obligation to address. So I think that's where that number, whatever that debt exclusion number comes from, that's what's driving my mind, is the needs.
well, and I raised this in part because this was a part of the discussion this morning where as we embark on things like the MSBA project and public safety feasibility, I think we do need to, and I think there's a very strong, if not unified view that the voters need to know though, that these projects are out there so they can see the full picture, including when it comes to, for example, schools, because if we're already at this tax level, that may help force decisions, whether we like it or not, about things like schools, how much, you know, we can do in the future, things like public safety, where people will hit a breaking point with respect to tax increases. And so that is part of the puzzle and the picture, including in my mind, that we need to be mindful of. And I think another aspect of this, which I put down here just for completeness, is the stabilization funds are different than a debt exclusion, right? The debt exclusion is spread over 30 years. Stabilization fund, you eat it all in 1 year. And so it really increases for $1 million in stabilization fund, that increases the taxes by $266.
It's going to hurt just as much as the $25 million.
Exactly.
Fuzzy.
Yeah, but
Right.
whatever the number
Yeah,
is.
but again, that's, sorry.
Yeah, so we just have to be mindful of that when we're thinking special stabilization funds. I mean, there's a high cost.
If we make a club sandwich here, it's going to be very tough. I
Yeah.
mean, even though it's just with different
It's
pieces
stacking.
and they seem small, it's going to be high. Yeah.
Yeah. But then we have to keep in mind also that we have a current debt exclusion that's rolling off, and to Mike's point, where, looking to fill it with. Replace it with some of the needs that we have right now, and so the current debt exclusion is 220 a year, at that median amount, and that ends in 2024, so. We're adding, but we're also removing, so we can think about the net as well.
So theoretically, if we did a $21 million debt exclusion, there would be a hit this year in taxes, but then next year it would even out.
Well, we wouldn't bond it all at once, right?
Right, and that's you say this, yeah.
Yeah, that was be my point. If you have an approval for a debt exclusion, just be mindful that it's not going to hit the tax rate for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years, depending on how we monitor interest rates. I mean, when we start construction right away, we'll have to borrow money right away, but I'll probably do it on a short-term note. You get better interest rates on a short-term note, and then you're just paying the interest. But until we bond the project and start paying back principal and interest, that might be 2 to 3 years down the road, and it wouldn't hit your tax rate until then. Whatever the interest is, say it's a 22 million, we borrow 10 million the first year, right? It's a 2-year project. When you borrow 10 million, you'd be paying interest. So we borrow 10 million in FY 24, you would only pay the interest on that in FY 25. And then probably just interest in 26, and we probably wouldn't see the full principal and interest payment until 27. As we monitor, interest rates and things of that nature, especially right now with interest rates being higher than they normally are.
And then part of this too is timing of projects and stabilization funds, right? So if we, in the immediate future, did a stabilization fund, but then we're able to run it down, we would be freeing up money in the tax levy for new projects that were emerging. And if we did debt exclusions, then it would be rolling down.
We could flatline it. Yeah.
We could try to, which I know has been your point, Jennifer, to try to find the right place to sort of hit around as projects come off and on.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, what you want to do, and you guys mentioned that, is what is the community willing to pay, right? And it's exclusions or override or, whatever you want to call it. And you have a number, so you always want to spend that number. So you're not decreasing the tax rate or spiking the tax rate. You're fitting new projects in as the debt drops off. And so you're always spending a certain amount of money. In Falmouth, it was 10 million a year, right? So as it, we would go to 9 million, I had $1 million we could do something with. So I always wanted to spend 10 million in excluded debt every year. And then there was no fluctuation in the levy from that. There's always going to be fluctuation with, Proposition 2.5 and things of that nature, but that's the point that you want to get to. And then it gives you total flexibility of, okay, we have to do this project, but you know what, let's do that in year 3 or 4, we have a heavy debt drop off. Or we can do this right away, or if we have 1 year where we have to input something to keep the levy up, it might be a capital exclusion, which you'd raise that in 1 year, it wouldn't be debt, but it could be capital. That's another vehicle.
So, Paul, I've been talking, go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
So this is kind of, to what you said earlier, one question I had for we've got the town hall, we've got fields. Is it beneficial for us to say, okay, we're gonna have a debt exclusion, which can only cover these things, fully expecting that, with how the town hall structure, it's gonna come in under budget somewhat, right? Is it better for us to say, okay, we're only gonna debt exclude a maximum of this, but it will only be used for this project? So we limit it, and if it comes in under, we limit the exclusion, or is it better to say it's gonna be 25 million and we're gonna fit all these projects underneath it? And if we have money left over, it can then go towards roads and sidewalks. What would be the best practice on that front?
Good question. So when you think of debt exclusions, each vote would be separate, right? So you'd have a separate debt exclusion vote for town hall and a separate debt exclusion vote for fields and courts with an amount of money. So it gives us the authority to borrow,
Okay,
right?
so we couldn't do multiple if we wanted to do,
You'd have multiple votes.
oh, okay.
But the creativity comes in is if you have so say town hall, town hall, they basically have bids and pans, but let's take fields and courts. You go to town meeting, and I'm just using arbitrary figures here, you ask for $4 million in a debt exclusion. So what that tells me is, it tells us that we can borrow up to $4 million, but as we construct the field, say it comes in at 3 million. So I still have the principal and interest on that million, whatever that would be, that would decrease, that we could put something else in with another vote.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It did, yeah,
Okay,
a little
I know, it can be super, it can get complicated.
Thank you for being able to have us on.
No worries.
So speaking of town hall, maybe we should move to town hall. I don't know. If someone wants to go first with their thoughts.
I've been liaising with them for a couple of years. You did beforehand, so I'm happy I mean, to me, I said this to somebody else earlier. I think this is, and I mean this, the most baked project you can ever expect from municipal government. It is, it's been reviewed, it's been studied. They've found the best size of building for the amount of money we're spending. They've accounted for the fact that so much of the cost is this building. With real needs like fire suppression and electrical work, which is 1920s. And their work, all their conclusions have led us down, have led us to the point where it's more advantageous for us to redo this building along with rebuilding that. That's the most cost-effective way to fix what is a real danger in the community, a real problem. The dollars, I don't think anyone likes the dollar figure, but it kind of is what it is. You can't, if we were building an empty warehouse in a field, it'd be way cheaper. If we weren't trying to restore a historic building, it'd be way cheaper. If we weren't trying to redo all the site work, it'd be way cheaper. But all those things are just, they're built in, they're necessary. So when I go back to how it's baked, they've looked at all the alternatives, they've looked at all the other options. And I don't think any of us are going to hold a sign and say, cheer, 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 it's a building, right? It's not very, it's just a building. But I think we have to come to the point to say, this is how it is. This is where we are. And, if we had done this 10 years ago, it'd be done. It'd be half the price. Are we going to push this off again for another 5 years, another 10 years, or wait till this building literally burns down? Or are we going to say, hey, we've got something in hand, which is so ready, and we've got confidence in it, we think this is the best, and then we can talk about how the town hall building committee has structured the price of this. And it's important that everyone knows, with the construction manager at risk, the number we have is going to be the maximum price. This won't be a project where we go for 20 million and then the end cost is 30. It's going to be one where it's going to be that price or less. And that gives me a lot of confidence to say they know their numbers and there's going to be no surprises, and we're only going to save money. So I am enthusiastically, as you can tell, supportive of this being the right pathway for our town. That's much better. Sorry, I went off so long.
Yeah, obviously, I agree with all of that. I think, one of the things as we talk over the next couple of weeks, which is really all we have, I think we need to look at the numbers and flesh them out a little more, because of that 21 million or whatever number is floating around, some of that's already been spent. We've already invested a few $1 million in the whole planning process. And to Corey's point, this is a fully baked, shovel-ready project that is, we have an obligation as leaders in this town to take care of our buildings, to identify needs and to act on them, and there are a lot of other things that are going to happen, but that's not going to make the need to deal with this building go away. This is, we employ over 25 or 30 people in this building. We're an employer. That is the number one, one of the number one things we are as select board members in the town of Cohasset, is an employer, and this is a workspace for people. And, I just think we have to take care of this building. We have to take care of our public safety building. We have to take care of our schools. We have to do all of the above. And it's not an either or, it is a all of the above, and it is not exciting to talk about it because it's not sexy, and but it is a need. It's been identified as a need and a priority for X number of years, more than 10. And I think that it's time to just make this happen, especially because we don't have another shovel-ready building project. Hopefully we will in 3 years, and at that point we'll have leveled off what we're talking about in terms of the debt roll off, And we will have a building that is functional, that can house committee meetings, and that is safe. And I have to say, no matter what, and I think we have to think about this for town meeting, is if this weren't approved at the ballot ultimately, so, assuming it gets through town meeting, it still has to get through a ballot vote for a debt exclusion. If it does not pass again, we cannot ignore the fact that we don't have an elevator in a public building that houses employees. We cannot get around the fact that we don't have fire suppression in this building, and we have our, financial staff and our assessing staff and our engineering staff and many others physically in this building, and we're gonna have to spend millions of dollars, and we need to be prepared to have that appropriated. I would argue, especially with the potential for CPC funding, and again, there'll be borrowing as well, and debt exclusion funding, we have to take care of this building, and otherwise, we're gonna have a backup plan to spend, a third of that money after we've already invested a couple $1 million, just to fix the things that are real safety concerns.
I don't disagree at all. My only thing where I see it, I mean, the town hall got voted down some years ago. And I think it's been a very linear way of thinking. No one came back to the town with a myriad of options. We have public safety issues, fire, police, town hall. And as you said, how many people, Chris? 25 people working, give or take, on a daily basis? And how many of those are still hybrid, just out of curiosity, or is everybody back in the office?
We'd actually never left the building during COVID, Paul. I mean, there was always people here. What's been missing is what we're doing tonight. And we weren't full during COVID, but I was here almost all the time. I mean, we had our management team in the building regularly. What's been missing is this feature has been lacking, this ability to do meetings. There used to be 4 or 5 meetings a night this time of year in this building.
Well, all right. That being said, so to me, I would have liked to, prior to joining in any sort of town services, as seen, at least been given a choice to vote for. Be the first to say that I voted against town hall. Because I'd like to see options. I'd like to see maybe a municipal building. But we spoke to the town hall committee, what was it, last week, the week before? We got a set of plans, admittedly so, sitting in a drawer. Town authorized another 675, a couple $1 million, since you put it down here. For a town hall, and no other options were looked at. As far as quote unquote, a municipal building, police and fire, we looked at the land. I mean, I know we looked at the other building down the street, whether it's feasible or not. But to me, I'm not averse to repairing town hall, a historic building. There's other options. But I think the town should be given that opportunity.
Okay, Jack, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah,
Or do rebuttals?
Yeah, I think I've been following this for a number of times. I went to a lot of the earlier meetings, and I spoke to some of the people who ultimately were on the town hall committee, including the chair, and they basically said, look, if we're going to go forward with this, we want to know we have some support or some assurance that we'll have a chance to actually implement it. And I know a little bit professionally about this kind of situation with an old building. Do you rebuild or replace? And the conclusions are that you got to basically trying to rebuild this particular building makes no sense. A new building is cheaper. If the minute you start with an old building, you end up with unintended consequences in that it's a lot worse than you thought. Everything has to be brought up to code, very expensive. So now you're halfway through a project and you realize it's blown through your budget and it's no end in sight. So I do think that a new town hall is the only solution. And I think we all have to concur that that's pretty accurate. There are some things that I think maybe went overboard. I still don't understand why we take the audio visual and the cable studio out of the high school where it's a learning tool in addition and put it into the town hall. I just didn't think that makes any sense. It's taken from the kids. And I don't know what their savings are. I've never gotten that figure. But I think this is where this type of discussion has really put us in the overall discussion. Ultimately, it is our responsibility of the select board to put this to the people so they can vote and make their decision on that with accurate information. I think that this is something we need to do, and this is a town decision. And I think our responsibility as select board, first and foremost, is to make sure that it is the cheapest that it can be. If there's things that can be pulled out of there, they're pulled out. But then we bring it to something where the citizens can clearly make a vote. And the other thing is that I think is very important, which is kind of underlying all of this discussion, is we have to make sure that we don't crowd out one project at the expense of others. And we go back to the purpose of the special stabilization and the long-term financial planning, which is, of course, so we know kind of what everything else is, so we don't favor one section of the community over another. Thanks.
So I have mixed feelings on town hall, for a variety of reasons, all of which different folks have articulated. I am concerned about the crowding out issue, and I think that if we were to go forward, it is absolutely incumbent on this board to provide our residents with the full picture of what's coming down the pipeline, so they can in fact make an informed decision. And I would be in favor of putting as much as possible on the warrant and the ballot in order to ensure that they see the realities of all these different projects out there, including the ones where we don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but we know something needs to happen, like public safety in the schools. I have concerns about the cost, which have risen tremendously with no real change in the actual project. And still, I haven't really heard or really understood why that has happened. It seems like we're at the potential height of the market as we see the market is starting to shudder. That said, I have concerns about not doing anything and continuing to defer decisions and projects year after year as well. And I think that if we do know we have projects hovering out there, the sooner we start now, the sooner we start on the decline on the debt exclusion. And so that way we can free up space later on for something like schools or public safety. Because if we make all the decisions at once on all the buildings, then we're truly in trouble. And so I think that that's a consideration in my mind that, you know, even though I don't like the cost, I think that it would be potentially more prudent to just start it now in anticipation of another project somewhere down the line. You know, to Paul's point, I wish that we had considered a municipal building years ago, because I think there's real needs with public safety as well. They probably are in a more dire place than town hall, all things considered, as I walk through both buildings. And they have a very important role within our community, including to access areas within our community. And, you know, I do wish that that was an option on the table, but here we are. So I think that, well, I don't know if anyone wants to say anything in response.
Yeah, no, I hear everything you're saying and agree. And I think that it is absolutely important for us to be honest with each other and everybody about, you know, the fact that we can't just ignore anything. We're gonna have sewer projects, we're gonna have water projects. You know, there was a question asked this morning just about some of the requirements for water treatment and things like that. I mean, there's always going to be something, and I think deferring on anything when we have an opportunity to move on it, we just have to keep moving. We cannot keep deferring projects and, you know, and bringing them to basically to the voters. One of the things a nuance that we probably should get details on is we can be as explicit as we want, but when it comes right down to the vote, the ballot, I mean, it reads very legalese and you don't even know exactly what you're voting for. So we can't say you are voting for a debt exclusion that's gonna look like this, that's gonna pay for that, that's gonna do this. It's, you know, we wanted to do that the last time around. And I also, just for clarification, you know, we did discuss a municipal building probably 6 or 7 years ago. And started with that, knowing that we needed public safety, you know, that public safety was, at that point, wasn't as an emergency as town hall. At least that was the decision made at that point. And one of the reasons we backed off a municipal building that would incorporate all of those was because the location is really what public safety wants, is they want something on 3A to hit the Beechwood area, because that's where the longer response time was. And at the time, the community did not want to have, they weren't interested in moving town hall off kind of the common, to be perfectly frank, that to be kind of this walkable village atmosphere. So those things were discussed. And again, we can relitigate everything over and over, but that analysis paralyzes us from making decisions. So Paul, I don't know.
So, well, you know my feelings on town hall. So when do we defer? So how far do we defer something that's, you know, public safety, our fire departments, our police departments? I would venture to say also that there may have been a presentation as to municipal building, as to what would make it palatable for the people in Cohasset. You know, I look at, we'll be kicking that can, public safety and fire down the road, or well, it's town hall's being kicked down the road. That's my take, because we'll have a lot of building, $22 million and north of it, be paying off until we attach something that's a lot more supports the town, and that's our police and fire. And I never saw anything about municipal building at all. So I don't think it was thought over very carefully, but if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I just think the town should be presented with options. I think it's been a one-track show.
The only thing I'll add, Paul, is that one of the things that one of the committees looked hard at was land. The single biggest challenge in this community is the availability of buildable land for a municipal structure. It's just not there. The town, we looked at every piece of town-owned land, or I should say, every piece of town-owned land was looked at. The Esposito property was actually acquired because of the town and agricultural lead on it.
I know the Esposito.
Yeah, so with the understanding that could be developed, you know, potentially developed, but at the very least it could be preserved forever because it's, you know, the peppermint brook is there. And again, I only have 10 years of history here, right? I've been told stories by people about how they've been talking about trying to site a 3A fire station for 50 years. And one of the sites is now Stop and Shop, and another site is now Shaw's, because I guess there used to be a Ford dealer or something up there. So the challenge is, one of the challenges, by the way, I totally understand where you're coming from. There are a lot of communities that do this stuff. It's been hard to find property, because we've even talked about the public works yard. You know, the RTF is not a very well laid out place. Where do we go? The state owns a nice chunk of land that's hiding up on Cracker Lane, but they don't want to get rid of it. And then most of the other land on 3A has been almost impossible to get our hands on. I mean, so that's just, so that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that has been faced by the committees, at least the time I've been here, is just finding a piece of land that's accessible, right? That on 3A to do something with that. Not that we haven't looked.
So in light of that, we've gone down, as I said, a one-track road, through town hall and upping. And we have avoided coming up again on our police fire department. I understand it's been looked at. I don't disagree with you. That has been presented to the town. No one's seen that. I never saw it. About how hard work this committee is looking at available lands for municipal building. All right, as far as I've seen, and I'd like to think some other people as well, it's been a straight drive towards the town hall. Again, we have a set of plans sitting in a drawer, admittedly so. spent a nice chunk of change on that, authorized another $675,000, and what did we come back with? Another town hall. So you see where I'm going with this. Where I think our police and fire are the utmost importance. And so that's where I'm going with it, and that's why I think people should be given the choice.
So. Diane and Corey, if you can go quickly, then I want to suggest something to move us along to next. step.
Yes, yes.
I want to talk about the alternative, Paul, because you brought it up a few times. Let's walk down that path, right? In the current situation we presented, $7 million of that total 20 whatever $million project is for this building, right? Let's say we say, no, we're going to move that structure somewhere else. The cost of then restoring this building goes up a lot, millions of dollars. It goes from 7 maybe to 10 because we have to redo. Right now, this building, all its heat also is all tied into that building. So we have to rebuild all the infrastructure here. So now we're at 10. Then we have to take that building down. We have to do other site work to make it into a parking lot. Parking lot cost, we just talked about that. Now we're 13 million, 15 million. So just to restore this building and not even have that, we're talking 15 million bucks more, right? And then we still have to build something somewhere else, right? Whatever it is, we're not gonna be able to build a building for 3 million bucks somewhere else. I think that's where, when it comes down to the alternatives, and if the town hall building committee researched this and basically said, every time we try a different tactic, all we end up with is spending more money and getting less. And that's, I think, where the alternatives led us here. I do want to also talk about costs. You brought up the idea that the market is softening. And I think it's important. Well, no, it's important to understand that the CM at risk thing, we benefit from the market softening. I mean, so usually you bid a building, you give the money to a developer, and then they would profit with anything that they could save in between. Right now, with CM at risk, what we're going to do is every step of the project, we're going to go out for bid. So if the bid's coming under, the town saves, doesn't contract it fixed, right? So if we think that the market's going to soften, it's a great time to do this, because we're going to be benefiting from competitive bidding on HVAC, on foundation, on siding, on concrete pouring. And every single time the market softens and those bids come in below budget, the town saves. Right, it's not the contractor that now is just charging us what we agreed to. We benefit. I want to thank the town hall building for that. I'm sorry, I apologize. The TV studio thing has been brought up. I do serve on the 143 TV board. We have a mandate to serve the community. It's been our board's firm position that we are better served the community to be in the place where the communication town has. We have our own fund, and it does seem by the place where the studio is in the basement was unprogrammed space, and it actually may save the town money. So that's been brought up as a concern, but I want to make everyone comfortable that the TV studio has its own funding mechanism. We've made it a priority. We've saved our funds in order to better service the town, and it will not be costing the taxpayers any additional. We'll actually save the building costs. We can project for us to be in the basement where it wasn't programmed. So just wanted to get that clear.
Okay, thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Okay,
Basically, any building project that we have to do requires a study. Like, we can't just do town hall or do a public safety building. So I just want clarification that is there money being asked for at this town meeting for a study for police and fire?
yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes. So why don't we, so what I would suggest generally is we'll return, I would suggest we return to these items and discussion on Tuesday. So that's only a few days from now. Everyone has time to marinate on what we're talking about. Including Fields and Rec, which we're going to hear more about, and Town Hall. I think that with public safety, we should confirm, but I understand that there's 200,000 that's being proposed out of our capital stabilization fund. I think that we can also talk about land and opportunities next week as well to, just get a better sense of historically what's been out there, Paul, to address some of your questions. And then I think the two places that we probably need to give or ask really for some direction are the school stabilization fund and sidewalk stabilization fund, which are more of question marks without specific numbers, right? This is where I think,
Roads and sidewalks.
I'm sorry, roads and sidewalks and schools. So, you know, one option is we could have, you know, Paul talk with Brian, Brian Joyce, Brian Host, and try to think through a number that you, Paul, from the sidewalk committee perspective, thinks makes sense for a stabilization fund amount. And we can talk through that, or we can ask Brian to come, or the Brians, to come next week to talk about what they might recommend on their end, or whoever the capital budget committee would like to send. And likewise, we could do the same with the schools. If we want to get some feedback from them on what they would suggest, including the timing of appropriations, which I think is important to them. You know, one thing that's important to me is to make sure we do security improvements. Typically, it's a good time over the summer to do work on the schools. So I think we want to, if there's work we want done sooner rather than later, I think, you know, we want to know that. If there's, you know, some items that we want to fund out of the stabilization fund, then we want to make sure we have the warrant articles that identify that. So that's what I would suggest for next week, but I don't know if anyone has any feedback that they want to, yeah.
No, I totally agree. I think next week we should be looking at, do we want to do a capital school stabilization fund? And this is the likely number. Same with roads and sidewalks. I think we need to understand what our capacity to actually do the work is too. That's important. And then the other thing I'd like to have in our packet for sure, kind of alongside, is what the current capital requests or recommendations from capital budget are. So that we just have those to kind of, so I can see it all in the context of what's over here. And for example, to your point about security, maybe security is in the capital budget for this year in our operating budget, and we don't need to think about that in the consideration for the stabilization fund, which is something separate.
Well, on Brian's point, it frees up
Correct.
legitimate requests. If we do the roads and sidewalks, and we get the $30,000 out of capital stabilization, we can then move faster on other
But
things.
we need to see things in both columns and decide where we're adding and where we're doing.
Yeah, I
that.
think we go forth. I think we should go forth as Jean just suggested.
Paul, did you have something you want to say?
Roads and sidewalks?
On anything?
Some particular, no, I just like the thing that just, I'm just saying, I'm just for transparency, getting agreement with town. I agree with you, putting out the most amount of information. Be it town hall, be it roads and sidewalks, be it schools. I would like to see get done in this town, the projects that are gonna have the most amount of impact on the most amount of people. Those are the ones I'd like to see. And I think sometimes, you know, we might get clouded on some special projects, but those are the projects I'd like to see. I'd like to see the sidewalks, I'd like to see. School, and especially the fields and science fields and, I'm sorry, track and field. The course. So like I said, the most amount, I just want to see the projects start going. I think the town would probably be favorable on it. That will have the most amount of impact on the most amount of our residents.
So two items that you just reminded me of that I might suggest also is we want to think about what we want to do vis-a-vis communications to get that messaging out on all of these items, because I think the sooner we can start on that, the better. And then, and how we want to approach that, particularly where, you know, people have different views. And then I think we also want to consider some policies with respect to the governance of the stabilization fund, maybe start that conversation. I don't think we necessarily need to have that all wrapped up by the end of March, but I do think it would be helpful as we think about these stabilization funds, because people will have questions, I think, and so it's important to.
Tuesday's enough time for town hall to do some of that, because I think we're looking for something more concrete now. Like, I think we've got a lot of ideas here, but like to have, like, almost like
Yeah.
last week, we didn't have the article, so it's hard for us to talk about if we don't have
Yeah.
the language of these things. Is Tuesday too much time, too close for you guys to kind of get us something more hard?
No, maybe not. Well, I don't think policies are gonna
No,
be.
not, yeah, but just something more tangible than where we are now.
I mean, we could look at draft warrant articles with placeholders. I think that's pretty form language. I think the bigger questions are how much? And then for what?
Exactly,
You know?
how much and what's in there.
Particularly with the school. I think they're gonna ask for the feasibility study and, we should continue to talk that.
Yep.
That's what we do to create the language that you need. We decide the policy and then we turn it.
Okay, so does that sound like a good plan moving forward?
Speaking of schools, that presentation last week. Did we go forward with feasibility study? That's an outside entity, right?
Presumably,
Does that?
yeah, we'd hire a consultant.
Because again, realizing our schools are in need of some repair, and I'd like to see a fact-based study. Speaking to people, the schools. I didn't consider them as bleak as what we're presenting. So that'd be one I'd like to discuss sometime this week. I don't think the situation is dire. Although the school attention.
I think, yeah, I think a fact-based study makes a lot of sense. What we don't want is a preliminary plan for whatever the outcome might be. I think an analysis, because I've obviously, as most of us have been to a number of meetings and tours. The real question is, should we remodel, rebuild? What needs to be done? What would that cost? Is there a new school needed? What would that cost? From what I've seen, I don't think a whole new school is financially feasible. I don't think you could ever get the override. Could be wrong, but I think having a dispassionate, unbiased consultant take a look at it would be very helpful. I'm not sure $1.5 million is needed for something like that. I think that's not a road we want to go on. Taking a look at it with a consultant for an overview makes a lot of financial sense.
Okay, so I think we have a roadmap or at least the beginning for next week. So why don't we move on to the next,
Sorry, there is one question. I don't know if you would
Okay.
like to get a question.
depends on what it is.
Let's see the question before I allow it.
This is Mike Nick, Jennifer Mullen put together a short overview of the stabilization funds proposals with an emphasis on differences in cost to the taxpayer over time, say year 1, comma 2, comma 5, comma 10, et cetera. We can use such an overview as soon as possible. Thanks.
Yeah, that's something we can consider for next week. She actually did that this morning at long-term financial planning, and it was also in the February 28th presentation, but we could do another quick summary as we think about a stabilization fund again. Mike, the short answer is that every year the select board votes to re-up how much we want to do based on that initial amount. We can increase it by 2.5%, no more. So if it's 1 million, that's $1,025,000. We can always decrease it. If we decrease it, let's say to $5,000, that's your new starting point. You can't go back to $1 million. And so it really can go up and down based on the need or the board. And so that's the quick answer, but we can have Jennifer again sort of show that in a year by year example. And I can send you the PowerPoint too. So with that, because we're a little behind, I'd like to move along to the annual town meeting review articles / vote. I see that we have our colleagues from water in the audience. And I think, Chris, you said sewer is off the list.
Or postpone that until next week.
Okay. So if everyone's amenable to it, I might actually move water up first, so that way you can present sooner rather than later. And we can have that discussion so as not to keep you longer than need be. I know we're already about 10 minutes over.
Thank you for having
Take a
us
break.
today.
We breaking.
No.
No.
Continue.
Great, let's get this done.
Yep. If you don't mind introducing yourself to the audience.
Sure, I'm Chris Pratt, Water District.
Leonard Jenkins, Vice Chair of the Board Commission.
Great. We will hand it over to you if you'd like to start.
Sure, we will address any questions you have on the budget. We did vote on an updated budget yesterday, so that had been submitted to Jennifer. As of this afternoon, there were no questions from her. I don't want to speak for her if she's here, but we and Lee also has been working on the budget with Brenda at the Water Department for many years. From what we are looking at this year, our revenue is strong, our expenses are going up, like many other things. And as you know, the process to treat the Cohasset water is difficult and complicated. So we are managing rising expenses across the board for the most part. But our projected 24 budget, we think is in good standing. We are showing a sizable surplus to be transferred to stabilization and retained earnings. So overall, we have no major updates or concerns for what we're projecting here.
So I have one question relating to the prior GAP system that I realize has been a question mark, maybe a little bit in terms of the cost. It doesn't look like there's any and I realize this is the operating and not the capital expenses, but is there any update on that for chance?
Yes, so we have completed the design process. We have 100% complete shovel-ready plans,
Okay.
should we choose to proceed with that project. Right now, we are engaged with Woodard and Curran on their consulting and engineering team to conduct a long-term master plan. So they are in the process right now of an 8-month study and analysis of our entire treatment process, our plant and infrastructure, to give us recommendations on what we should be considering over the next 5, 10, and 20 years for the plant. Plant is aging, so technology is changing, requirements for compliance are changing. So we are taking a holistic look at the plant. And based on that and some other feedback and opinions we got, we decided to continue with the design process for the GAC system, have 100% complete design plans, but put the installation on hold until we get this study back from Woodard and Curran. And we may very well, you know, in the coming months, get a recommendation from Woodard and Curran to say, this is your best option for spending $6 million. It is a very sizable project. It came in way over budget, twice as much, in fact. And that was just something we weren't ready to commit to based on some of the other requirements and needs for the department.
Okay, can I say something about that also? Because when that project came in, there were 2 bids, one for 5.8 from a local engineering firm and the other one for 3.6 that was voted 2-1 at the meeting. I voted against the 3.6 because I realized it probably wasn't enough because that engineering firm didn't do a lot of work in the Northeast. And it was supposed to be for TTHM plus also PFAS. When push came to shove, it was, well, it's only for this kind of PFAS, it's not for that. And so we don't know whether or not that would really meet our needs. So this is another aspect we have to look into. Because if we get any substantial PFAS infiltration, or right now, Mass Water Works Association is working with the state, and the state may be changing what the PFAS levels are and lowering them, which could put us in a bad situation. So we're looking at that. And they also did a GAC study of Elms Meadow. I don't know if you know that Elms Meadow is currently closed. which is negatively impacting us because in 2015, we insulated the wellheads to give us year-round water instead of just seasonal as had been done before. So we were getting 20% of the water at 60% of the cost. That meant less chemical cost and less sludge. So for 2 years, we've had higher chemical costs and higher sludge costs. And now our sludge costs are even going to go higher because Bourne, Massachusetts is not going to be accepting our sludge anymore, and we have to transport it to Connecticut. That's why our sludge account has gone up. If we could get something done with the well field, I have been working for 10 years trying to alleviate the situation over there because there has really been no enforcement of the illegal dumping of commercial and neighborhood yard waste, which I think has been contributing to the pollution. We've done tests in the pit at the end of Norfolk Road, and it even shows some PFAS is coming down from the upper areas, but it's not anything to do with septic because that area has been sewered for 25 years. And I've gotten reports from people in the neighborhood that a lot of people are still using chemicals on their land, that people who come to put them on are in hazmat suits, and we've seen local people who keep bees have their bees all dead. So I've been trying for 10 years to get a pollinator meadow over there to eliminate the invasives, clean it up, and put in natives of birds to attract birds, butterflies, and bees. But unfortunately, there haven't been any people in town who are really behind it.
Ms. Jenkins, if I could recommend Wild Cohasset, I believe it was, that is
Well, I've
putting
talked to
the
Lissy about
pollinator
it.
meadow into.
Yeah, no, I've talked to Lissy about it.
Okay,
So far in cleanup days, we've had 1 Boy Scout and 3 adults coming to help us clean up. The schools say they are totally behind us, protecting the drinking water supply. That's why they send the kids down to the beach. And this is after we unfortunately found 2 students on a camera dumping yard waste next to the sign that says public drinking water. supply for
Ultimately,
dumping.
that
Right.
well
Yeah.
field will require an additional filtration system to treat
Yeah.
for PFAS. So that
So we're
is,
looking into that
that's a
too.
consideration as to what we're looking at. That's why we can't approve a $6 million installation for something at the plant. When we have the well field, which also will require at least $700,000, in my opinion, to put in an additional filtration system. So a lot of those factors are going into
Yeah.
where we're at right now.
See, and the other problem too is we are still working on paying back debt that was accrued in the last century.
I think a lot of Cohasset is.
Yes, and and part of it is for the well field. Yes,
You guys just went through a bunch of big projects and you got, what was the project? The water
Ellis
main.
Meadow,
No,
Elm
you did Elm Street and then you just started another one.
Beechwood.
Beechwood. Yeah, so and it's great that you're transferring so much money into the capital projects, so it's a great smart use of funds. At the end of this year, what are you projecting? We don't have the number for what is the fund balance gonna be at the end of this fiscal year? Do you know?
We don't have any drawdown from retained earnings or stabilization. We should be putting another 600,000 into it combined, so it will be 2.3 million combined.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
After
rough-
this year's.
Rough math, yeah.
Gotcha.
So we have 1.5 million in retained earnings and 77,000 in stabilization.
Gotcha.
So if we do in fact put another 600 in that, that's good. But again, we do have needs, so we can't say that nothing will come up.
Absolutely.
Well, we just got that $165,000 change order for Beechwood because of a mistake that was made during the bidding process.
So one thing I would like for you to consider, and I wish Chris was here, but Jennifer, you may know, the town has the ability to seek reimbursement of ARPA funds.
Mhm.
And certain ARPA funds have very strict categories, one of which relates to water and sewer. We're contemplating spending some money right now with respect to our sewer funds. Vis-a-vis the ARPA funds, water may be another eligible category. I'm not sure, Jennifer, how much we have left in the unrestricted or the restricted ARPA fund category.
I want to say maybe, because we talked about wastewater issues or
Yeah.
sewer, I would say maybe $150,000.
Okay. So it's not that much, but you might be one of the few funds that's actually eligible for the money at the end of the day. So we should continue to engage in that discussion, because if we don't use it, we lose it. I believe we have to apply by either the end of this year or next year.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, we are benefiting from that to help defray the cost, as Lee just mentioned, the additional cost of the Beechwood project. So as she mentioned, we have a $160,000 change order in addition to what we're already spending. So last I was updated, we will be utilizing ARPA to cover that. And we will, going forward, we will be looking at all different types of grants and other funding sources, not necessarily loans or debt, but anything we can apply for and look at in terms of grants from both federal level and the state level.
Just on the PFAS, I moderated a statewide panel on PFAS up like a year and a half ago or something during the pandemic. And one of the things that struck me was that Massachusetts has one of the most, the lowest in the country, and there's no federal standard, which I believe, exactly. I was very happy to hear that they were going to be discussing a federal standard, because I mean, water, sewer, air, I mean, it doesn't matter where the town boundary is. We share the same water, we share the same sewer. So my question is, Massachusetts is considering lowering it again?
Yeah, no, I thought the federal standard was 80 in Massachusetts, it's 20.
Yes, so there was no federal standard, but as far as I know, and they're now discussing one, but it's not gonna be anywhere near what Massachusetts is.
I
And
thought it was
so-
gonna be low. Never mind. We'll have to do it. It's one of the unknown balls in the air.
but you're saying that Massachusetts is considering even lower.
They're looking into, yes.
And then my second question is then, are there any communities or any guidance as to what we can do in a community to help prevent or mitigate the PFAS levels and the contamination of our water supply? Because if they're gonna make if they're gonna make the level so low, it's only gonna keep costing us more and more and more money that we're not gonna be able to keep up with. And we're getting water that's from somewhere else in another state with a different standard or whatever it might be. But what can we do to, is it to restrict use of certain products, or is
See,
this
well,
really?
this is just it, we have been trying for 10 years, as I said, to inform people, especially about dumping on their water source and the well field. Be careful about what you're using on your lawn, so people don't even realize that they have discovered that when they hire these companies to come in and put in supposed organic materials on their lawn, that the containers that the organic materials are transported in leach the PFAS into the materials. And, and I don't think our students in the schools really understand about a lot of things too, because PFAS is in everything, even in food containers. And when you see them just dumping them around, and we have to be careful where we're doing development in town. That's why we were very proactive at 508 Cushing Road, indicating that they really couldn't put a service station repair shop on the bank of Zone A water source.
I think we're dealing with many decades of past behaviors and practices. They refer to them as the forever chemicals.
Yeah.
So they're not going away. Environmental protection and good habits around the community are the key.
And this
See,
is
and then
the
one
budget-
other
this is
thing
the
that I want
budget-
to mention too is, with people with young children are always very concerned about flammable clothing. And they don't realize that when they wash their clothing, that comes out in the wash. And if you have a septic system, it goes through the groundwater. And there was a study a couple of years ago that CSCR did over from the top, Erin River down through Bound Brook, all the way into the harbor. And, it showed the optical brighteners all the way along. So people's wash water coming all the way from Erin River down into the harbor.
And this is a budget discussion, but I think that ultimately I see in sewer has the same challenges, we have to address so much and it's the right thing to do. And it's just gonna squeeze us, our budgets, and, you know, we only have a limited amount of people paying these bills, so. I think that another follow-up conversation that I'd love to be a part of at some point, or the community, is what can we do? What are simple, whether they're policies for the community, for the town, or whether they're just community efforts and initiatives that we can do to help lower this, mitigate some of the problems that we have, so that ultimately your budgets are a little freer and,
Well, and you know,
people aren't
unfortunately,
paying.
I really don't see our budgets getting freer right now, because as I said, we're still paying debt service. If you take a look at what we're paying this year, it's $2 million.
I'm talking these
on debt.
massive implemental things that are gonna, that sock us every year, and every time there's a more restrictive, you know, sensibility.
Well, I think we have to really think about getting the schools involved so that the students really know what they're doing and learn about water. Because there's so many aspects. I've been trying to inform them for 35 years about the community car washes and how that's putting petrochemicals and heavy metals into our water supplies.
And be continued, yeah.
It's continued, and it just continues and continues, and people are just, whatever, we send out flyers, we were sending out flyers in the water bills. How many people ever looked at them? They always told me, oh, we just threw them out. And we did have two former selectmen, remember Kerry and Kevin, they were posting on their Facebook pages for us. But it didn't seem like it had any effect either. You know, I don't know how to go out and reach them.
Maybe
This is what our problem is.
Read the flyers. No, I'm just kidding. So I think, thank you. Yes, thank you, Diane, too, for raising sort of the bigger picture issues, which are important. But I do want to be mindful of time, including folks in the audience
I know, and you have your schedule.
who are up next. So unless we have any further questions, I think that, thank you again for the discussion, and hearing nothing, we will move to the next article item. So thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Lee.
Let's do fields and courts.
You have one hand up. You have one hand up in the office. Would you like to propose, Mr. Kears?
Yes,
You have to say?
yes, Mr. Kears, you have a few minutes.
Can you hear me at all?
Yes, yep,
Oh, okay, yeah. I was here for the sewer budget, so I don't know if you had any questions on that. We submitted a draft sewer budget. It has gone up just a little bit. We're mainly putting a cushion in there for expenses that are directly related to the issue that we're having at the facility. And we're hoping that those issues will resolve themselves over the next 6 to 8 months, and we'll be able to recoup any expenses is our plan. So
great. Well, thank you. We look forward to hearing the discussion at the next meeting or shortly thereafter.
I've been communicating with Commissioner Kears about just polishing up the budget presentation a little bit. I think we should be all set for next week.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for updating us.
you're welcome.
Is there? Carol?
So fields and courts. So we've been socializing this for a few weeks now, at least here. We've been socializing it since 2021 with the youth organizations and other members of the rec commission. Through all the feedback, we've decided to scale the project back for phase 1. Before we were looking at pickleball courts, tennis courts, and many other additions. And what we've decided is to just renovate the 6 tennis courts that are there today, renovate the retaining wall, fix the drainage for the phase 2 project, which would then incorporate maybe some additional parking. And by doing so, we've reduced the cost to $1.3 million for this segment of phase 1. Part 2 of phase 1 would be getting a regulation sized field, multi-purpose field at Deer Hill. renovating the softball diamond, doesn't need a ton of renovation. CPC did fund a renovation for that project maybe a year or two ago. Adding fencing. And really adding lighting, so they have use of the multipurpose field for additional hours, because we do have a shortage in multipurpose fields. We are looking at the lacrosse wall. Originally, the lacrosse wall price was coming in at about $115,000, $125,000. What we've decided to do is fund the wall itself. That wall is $15,000. The remainder of the wall will be appropriated for fundraised by youth lacrosse or the lacrosse boosters. And the total phase one project is now at $2.9 million versus what we've presented before, which was closer to $4 million. We recently received a cost for design and engineering of this phase one project, and that's coming in at $239,000, so $240,000 to complete that study. We are going before CPC Monday evening to ask for design funding. And we'll just see what the appetite is for the community to move forward with this phase one project.
So Michelle, quick question maybe for you, Corey, too.
Yeah.
240 seems like a small amount for CPC. What is our appetite / interest in more? Because there's some more that's certainly eligible as we think about, hitting the tax base with all other things too. And Corey, maybe I'd like to, hear your feedback on them.
I mean, yeah, you're familiar with, I mean, the CPC one, that's 600 grand a year roughly. So this is half of, not quite half, but let's say half of what would come in 1 year. There are other requests. We've got the Beechwood playground, we've got other, so. Can't be the committee, and the committee will obviously have to talk, but this, just like capital, lots of competition for the same amount of dollars. So yeah, CPC will have to figure out how much of that 239 to me seems like a pretty big chunk. Last time there was a $200,000 plus. The committee reacted fairly strongly to that being such a large such a large part of that funding cycle. So I am a little bit apprehensive about that amount.
239.
About the whole 239, yeah, based on just historically, again, I can't speak for the committee, but that's just historically, that's a big chunk of what they're expending.
And are they gonna vote on it Monday, just so we can plan accordingly on our end with the warrant and?
Do you mind? Well, there's just been a little bit of, you go first, it's the chicken and egg problem here. CPC spoke a long time about needing the select board to be clear about what they're asking, and now we're also saying here, well, tell us what. So I'm not quite sure how we end that logjam, but I'm open to any suggestions on that front because I think we're both boards are looking for guidance from the other
Well,
board.
it sounds like CPC needs to make a decision, because if they can't fund it, we don't want to see a debt exclusion for only partially the amount. You know what I mean?
No, I don't disagree. Yeah, exactly.
Like they just need to make a decision one way or another.
Okay, I will. I'll have this discussion with the committee and see
Yeah.
how that is. But from my seat on this board, I'm 100% for this project, whatever we have to fund, including free cash or whatever we need to do. I mean, let's get this done. So.
Yes.
Michelle, where do you get the feedback to scale it back?
So we've had several public forums, and then when we presented last week, there was a lot of feedback that came after the presentation last week, and people didn't understand the need for pickleball courts. They thought it would be best just to renovate the 6 tennis courts and actually stripe one of the tennis courts for pickleball, and see if there is that interest before we go and invest in laying down 5 or 6 pickleball courts.
And what was the overall view about the lights? I have my opinion on them.
Yeah, so to be honest, we didn't really hear a lot of feedback about the lights. We've had questions, what time will they shut off in the evening? How often will they be used? But we didn't have great opposition to the lights.
You mean at Deer Hill Park?
For some reason, I'm trying to open these documents and Adobe's giving me some trouble, but just the breakdown of the 2.x million dollars. If you could just give us kind of a big picture of that, and is the 240 for engineering or for the study is that as the engineering?
That's separate from the 2.9. The 2.9 is construction costs to build.
And then in terms of the lacrosse wall, and then give me the big picture.
Sure.
The lacrosse wall, you said the wall itself, or
Correct.
something we're gonna put into the funding. And I guess it would be the field around it or some.
Exactly. So,
that's privately funded.
we could excavate the land and make sure the wall was put in position properly with that $15,000. What we would ask the boosters or the youth organizations to fund is the turf that goes around the field, the lacrosse wall. Because it's recommended that you always put turf around it because the kids are always standing in the same spot, therefore wearing out the grass area around the lacrosse.
And then just big picture, like the tennis courts are 1 point whatever.
Sure. So the tennis courts,
There we go.
yeah, so tennis courts are coming in at about $550,000.
And again, it's not the project that's in the schematic. It's actually just
It's just gonna be
just the
tennis
6
courts.
tennis courts.
Just 6 tennis courts. Exactly what's there today is what you'll see renovated. And you'll see a new retaining wall reconstructed there. So,
And Michelle, if I may interject, one of the considerations too was parking. Where we didn't quite have parking figured out in this area that's already pretty densely parked. That adding a whole set of pickleball courts without having that piece was gonna be a little tricky, all things considered as well. And so I think that's another good reason for the test run with striping one of the courts, because if you don't stripe the other 5, they can do tournament play.
See what happens in Wellesley with the pickleball.
That came up.
that did
Yeah.
come up, that came up.
I mean, I've been a proponent and fan of getting these tennis courts taken care of for about 8 years. This is ridiculous. I'll fundraise myself if I have to. It really needs to get done. And the other question I had was the lights.
So that's the next one.
Okay. So if I remember, it was 475. That just seems exorbitant. So I think I just want to hear that that's what it costs. And what are we talking about in terms of lighting?
Yeah, so it would be lighting the multi-purpose field as well as the softball field.
Okay.
So essentially, you're gonna light that entire area that you see there. And I think we can get more concrete pricing, knowing that we know someone that actually just ordered lights, and is having them installed. So we'll be able to give you exact pricing, knowing what's happening, elsewhere. But 475 was the estimate we did receive.
And then this might be a question for you, Ted, just in terms of like management of these facilities, when we created the agreement with the CYBSA, SBA or whatever it is, they're gonna monitor the timing and all that. How does it work for these public fields? Does that go through the schools? Does that go through rec? And to make sure that the lights are going off at a certain time, or how's that anticipated to be?
Deer Hill usually falls under schools, so it'd be under Stuart Dundee or in Knoxville.
So if there was like the field hockey group wanted to have a night game on a Friday, that would all get funneled through the schools because of the location. Okay.
So just like we have with other organizations, we would determine the times the lights shut off and the times the lights are used. And they'll be on a timer, an automatic timer to make sure that they do shut down at the specified time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have you guys discussed the return on investment, say for the lights, fixing up the fields?
So
When I say about this, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about having our kids safe in town, James coming in instead of our kids going out. Just people being able to enjoy. What we have to offer is that, I see kids and friends and kids being shipped out to play games.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about with term
So
investment.
that was part of the field study.
That did come up.
It did come up because a lot of the youth organizations were saying they don't have regulation size fields to play on. They're playing, our fields aren't striped well. The kids are at a disadvantage. So that all came up through these public forums. And what really came up was the overuse of our fields. And I think now is probably a prime example, right, Ted? Milliken Fields, it's wet because of all the weather we've had. You can't get on there until it dries out. So where's their alternative? We don't really have one. So by having another grass field that's maintained, will alleviate the congestion on Milliken and be able to push kids there.
That's what I meant by return on investment.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can rotate activity too to help some fields rest as well, which preserves their life. Thank you, Michelle and Ted, for all of your work here. Is there any other comments online before we move on?
We do not, I don't see any other two platform.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right. Stormwater. We're moving through, a little bit off time, but. yeah. Stormwater?
She's on, Charlotte's gonna present, she's on Zoom.
Okay, great.
This should be all these materials are in the packet, right, Tracy? Yeah. The stormwater stuff. Yeah. Favorite.
Charlotte, I'm going to make you co-host, so you can share your screen.
Hi, everyone.
So,
Hi, Charlotte.
So you're here.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Charlotte. I'm the conservation agent, and I can run through the proposed revisions that we are hoping to make for the stormwater bylaw. Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want me to just talk it through? Do you guys have them all on your screens?
why don't you, if you don't mind, share your screen for the audience?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. So this is the stormwater bylaw. I'm just going to go down each section. So just to summarize, a lot of the edits that we are proposing are mostly procedural in nature. So this first section that you see is about submittal requirements. We just wanted to clarify that the submittal requirements are essentially the same or similar for amended submissions. Because sometimes, things happen during construction where we need to change the site plan. So we just added amended stormwater permit or administrative approval permits language throughout these sections to, just clarify that the submittal requirements are going to be essentially the same, for amended permits. And then this next section is a new section that we created. This is just to kind of clarify that if people are aggrieved by a decision, they can appeal, and we already have language in our bylaw about that. So this first section is really just adding that amended language. And then this is the new section that we made. This is about the permit. We wanted to suggest a 3-year expiration date for our stormwater permits, because currently our bylaws do not specify an expiration date. And the reason why we're proposing 3 years is because we also issue wetlands permits, and wetlands permits under the state and our bylaw are good for 3 years. Oftentimes when you have large projects, you have a stormwater permit and a wetlands permit. And so we wanted to just be consistent with the 3-year time frame so that, all work is approved for that 3-year period. And then we did include similar language from our bylaw about the application process, which is, the extension process, excuse me. We requested some edits to just create an extension process if somebody wishes to extend the life of their permit. We did suggest 1 year, just to kind of keep that within, a reasonable time frame, but then also added language about possibly, extending it for longer as the, per the commission's discretion. So this language is pretty much similar to our initial submission language, kind of just essentially almost formatted the same way, except it's for, amended permits as well and extensions. And so these changes that you see on the screen here are also for our amended permit process. We have a basic description about amended changes in our regulations, but we wanted to expand it and clarify it in our bylaws. That again, the amended process is essentially the same. If you have to, submit revised plans, the changes will go through a hearing as they would for an initial stormwater permit. Sometimes changes can be determined to be minor. So we did add this language, which is already in our regulations, that if changes are minor, I can approve them administratively on behalf of the commission. But again, if they need an amended submission, they would go through this process through an amended, permit. And so this is the language about an additional 1 year for an extension, and additional periods can be considered at the commission's discretion with just a written request at least 30 days prior to the expiration. And we do have a similar process for our wetlands permits for an extension. So again, we are trying to be consistent with the types of permits that we issue, how long they last, and if they can be extended and for how long. So this is the new section that we made in our bylaws. I don't know if people want to slowly read it or if you want me to just go through each paragraph, but that's basically the summary of this entire section to clarify that permits will last 3 years with a 1 year extension with a written request or an additional, extension periods per the commission's discretion, and then clarify the process for amended permits, which is essentially the same as an initial, permit process. And so that's basically the majority of the changes. We did include a couple sections just to clarify about permission to access sites. Just, kind of clarifying that the applicant should grant the commission and the and/or agent permission to enter the site. And this is really only for the purpose of inspections and a pre-construction visit for most stormwater permits, and then a final inspection at the end. So that was just some clarification language we put in this section here. And then the last couple changes we made with, as discussed with council, were to clarify some additional enforcement procedures. One of our common procedures is show cause hearings. And we do have language about this in our regulations, but we just wanted to add it to our bylaws. And then per the request of town council, we changed the non-criminal disposition fee from 100 to up to 300. That's allowed per the, the state regulations. So these were some of our minor language edits here, but I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any sections on the screen, whatever's easier.
Are there any questions the select board has?
Thank you, very straightforward. My only question is just, has this been voted on by the commission? And I assume they're all in support of it.
Yes, yes. And we had this language reviewed by town council, and then we brought it to, I apologize, I cannot remember the meeting date. I think it was in January, right before the submission deadline. So we did approve it in January 23 through a public meeting. I can get the date for you guys, but we did have this language also reviewed by town council.
Great, thank you.
I have one quick question, and thank you for your presentation too. Section 11B2, I think you said that the distinction between what's a proposed change that's minor as compared to moderate or significant. Is this already in your regulations and you're just codifying it now in the bylaw? Was that?
Correct. So I believe it's, if I get this, it's section 4 in our stormwater rules and regulations, and I think it's subsection E. We have a short paragraph about project changes, so they have to communicate changes to the agent and commission in writing prior to them being done. And then if the changes are determined to be significant, basically they go for review to determine if the changes are significant enough. So that's really what we wanted to expand upon and clarify in these bylaws. If the changes are minor, that they can be approved administratively by the agent without submission of an amended permit. But if the changes are moderate or significant based on the protected interest, performance, and design standards in the bylaw and regulations, we can do an amended permit. And so we also have a similar workflow as well for our wetlands permits. We do break down minor, moderate, significant, and moderate significant changes also need to go for an amended permit. So we're definitely trying to streamline and make our both of our bylaws consistent with how we review changes for our permits.
I'm curious if the select board feels so inclined to put this on as a warrant article. Warrant article, I think right now it's currently proposed as 21 to help move the process through with the warrant articles. It seems like this is, pretty fully thought through and vetted by the public and also the commission.
I think we should definitely get this done.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I move that we place the stormwater management bylaw revision on warrant.
Okay, I'm gonna do a roll call vote because Jack's on Zoom. Mr. Creighton, would you like to vote first?
Jack Creighton, aye.
Yeah. Mr. Evans,
For Evans, aye.
Mr. Grady,
Already,
okay, Ms. Kennedy,
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Jean Haley Dipple. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Pictel. We appreciate all of your hard work,
Just one other question. Has this been before advisory?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
but now it can be.
That would only worry.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Mr. Senior, do you want to talk about the name of square in town?
Yeah, I have to confirm with by the way, unfortunately, Michael Ernst, who grew up in town, served in the Navy as a SEAL, actually. Was unfortunately killed in a training accident last month. I think that was reported. And the town has historically limited the naming to people who died in combat or in training. It died as an active duty military. So there's been a request to do that here. I still have to confirm with council whether or not town meeting has to do this. I'm not sure if the select board could just do it on its own, quite frankly, which would be simpler. Though it's not a bad thing to do in front of town meeting either, but I have to just confirm.
Okay.
Either way, if it needs to go in front of town meeting, there'll be an article. I'm gathering that's the consensus. But I do need to confirm with council if it needs to go to town meeting. So.
Is there a square in mind?
That I have not heard, so. Again, if you, a square in Cohasset is not, like Inman Square or something in Boston, right? They're little traffic islands for the most part. I'm not sure which one is being thought through. Glenn Pratt has been and a group have been kind of, identifying these. I don't know if they've identified one, quite frankly, yet. But we will most certainly find out.
Okay. So it sounds like we're standing by waiting for more information. Okay. All right, and I would just recommend something near the water. It seems like it would be nice and fitting for a Navy SEAL.
And/or. We should, I was thinking, I believe he was a lacrosse player.
Oh, I was thinking the field.
And thinking that, maybe it could be a field, but I'll wait for the recommendations from.
I'll circle back with Glenn and find out.
Yeah.
Maybe it's always Tuesday.
I don't want to speak for the board, but it's a no-brainer.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So now we're moving on to the KP Law waiver. Discuss that.
So this is, Chief Billy has been looking to update some of our intermunicipal agreements with other police departments. And in order to do one with Norwell, KP Law happens to represent both Norwell and Cohasset, so they need a waiver of conflict, a conflict waiver. Because there's really no conflict, neither side is getting a deal on this, right? It's just the process that needs to take place, so they actually have agreements ready to go. So the select board needs to certify or formally vote to waive any conflict. And then there's forms that you have in front of you, that would need to be signed. So again, I don't see any issue with this. And it needs to be done on a case of the work. We have to find another law firm to do this, which we don't really want to do.
Is there a motion?
So I'm going off you. This may be a little bit uncomfortable, and I was wondering if we could use just Cliff and Kenny for this, just to have some. I mean, I know they're labor, but they're in fire police. But if you think it's really not a problem,
No. Again, I don't think it's a problem at all. They do this routinely, and the only reason it's a conflict with this is because they haven't represented all of them.
no, I understand that. Yeah. So
Yeah, no, I don't. There's no. Again, these are fairly standard documents. They just need to be fresh and updated. And KP actually has them ready to go. So it would be simpler and easier for them to be able to do this work. It's not, if there's a labor issue or something that'd be different. This is easy, I think.
And probably covered under our retainer, or it wouldn't be with.
Yeah, I don't think it's even cost extra money.
Well, and we could confirm if it makes you feel better, but my understanding would be you would have a totally separate lawyer at KP representing us, and they would be walled off from whoever is representing Norwell. So it's not like there would be
Correct.
that, sort of mingling of representation.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
Is there specific language?
There is a determination that we can sign, and I'm
There's a motion to adopt.
happy to make a motion to approve and sign the determination that KP has requested that we sign, and I'm happy to read it out loud for the record if you want. It's the last page of what we have in our packet.
You want to just do the header?
I'll second.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It's in our packet. We clearly know what we're signing or approving.
Okay, so was there a second?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
Did I make the original motion?
I did.
I think you
Jean
did.
did.
Okay.
Paul seconded. The motion is to approve and sign the determination located in our packet that is contained at the, right after the letter that KP sent us.
And thanks, Justin, for putting it up there. And my only comment is that, if the public is watching, I want to make sure they know what we're doing. So we know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all good.
All right, Mr. Creighton, your vote?
Jack Creighton, aye.
Troy Evans, aye.
Already,
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Jean Haley Dipple Dye. All right, I'll pass this around. Everyone wouldn't mind signing it real quick, and then now let's go to the national opioid settlement.
So this is a follow-up that the board approved so there's been a big opioid litigation starting sometime, and the towns joined the settlement that the Mass Attorney General had been part of for the major producers. And that happened, and the town is in the process of getting funding for that, though we're still waiting to figure out how to process it properly. There's been an additional settlement with 5 distributors, I should say, six, Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, Allergan, and Table, which are all companies that sold. The board needs to authorize accepting that settlement. And I would ask that for the simplicity of this, because there's 5 online documents that have to be done. If you can authorize me to take care of the signature of them, it needs to be done this month, and then the town will receive additional things. I don't have that schedule in front of me, but this settlement was about half of the last one, I think, so there'll be approximately 50%, I think, more funds coming in. They are restricted, they have to be used for things related to drug addiction and community work. Basically, Quest Safe Harbor is probably where we're gonna make the money run through. I don't know if we're actually, once this is approved, we can then also sign up for the distribution, so that's already to go. In your packet, it's the whole information, there's a long document, and there's five of them. But council from KP, Carolyn Murray, has set up a simple resolution that I think, or motion, I think.
I have a proposed motion, but before I read it, are there any questions that the board has?
Do you want to just read it aloud? I'll make the motion just for
Sure.
chair simplicity.
Here's the proposed motion that the select board sign on to the national opioid settlement negotiated by and among the Massachusetts Attorney General and Teva, Allergen, CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart. And that Mr. Senior Town Manager be authorized to execute any documents necessary to carry out this vote.
So moved.
All right, Mr. Creighton, roll call vote.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Mr. Evans,
Gray Evans, aye.
Mr. Grady,
Paul Grady, aye.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Jean Haley Dipple, aye. Okay. Moving on to the sidewalk charge. This, as folks may remember, this was just to replace the sidewalk committee member from Open Space and Recreation with Recreation Commissioner instead, because Ms. Rollins was on the Recreation Commission, not Open Space and Rec. And so that's where we landed, and we said we would follow up, and now we're doing that.
Can I move to amend the sidewalk committee charge to replace the open space and rec position to be open space and rec or recreation commissioner? Keep it open.
Second?
Okay, roll call vote, Mr. Creighton?
Jack Creighton, aye.
Brandon's eye.
Already, aye.
Diane Kennedy, I.
Jean Haley Dibble. All right, Mr. Senior, moving on to the next item.
All right.
Update?
Just very quickly, the town meeting, we're in the last couple of weeks. I was joking saying I was filling out our town meeting bracket with Tracy yesterday, making sure we're all lined up. There's a whole series of meetings that all interlock. This being one of them. There's meetings next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Right now, we're on target to hit everything with the select board doing its final votes on April 4th. So that's the, we should be on target for that. That'll allow plenty of time to get the warrant printed and distributed and to do any other work in advance. Right now, I've got to distribute, I was hoping to do it tonight, but I'll have it for you hopefully tomorrow, but we'll get like a little calendar showing what should be on the next couple of agendas just to keep on the flow. And the goal is to keep the meetings comparatively brief, so you can just, get through stuff. Last night, advisory heard all the zoning. They approved them all after some good conversation unanimously. Judge Cutler and Tom Callahan did a nice job of tag teaming, and Lauren Lind has been retained to help with as a consultant with that, because she had been working on it for so long, so she was helpful in that too. So that, in theory, I think we'll tee up for next Tuesday, hopefully, and we'll do the agenda later with Jane and Jack. So, and then you'll have the VOTAC next week, and also the Valor Act. I presented that. I actually have some materials on that too. Those are ready to go for next week. The advisory voted unanimously for that last night, the Valor Act, and voted for the VOTAC amendments. And then capital budget's scheduled next Wednesday to vote at 5. And hopefully they'll get to advisory that night at 7. So you'll have that the following week. It's kind of just like that. So that seems to have come together really nicely. I want to thank Michelle for all the work she's been doing with advisory. I'm sorry, with capital. And then, so again, I think, providing we have no weather events the next couple of weeks, we should be on target to hit with all, the final votes ready for you folks on the board. So you'll meet the 28th, 21st, 20th.
No, I was waiting for you to finish.
Oh, yeah, that's my update.
Is there anything updates? You and I spoke about this on the fire,
Yes, so,
the recognition for the chief.
yeah, so we're,
Or the assistant. and-
so I have to circulate back with the chair and vice chair, but I'm looking for April 4th, I think.
I thought we were gonna try to do this in March.
We were, so Justin's not here, he's doing a little video for them. So, I mean, I could try to advance it up, I'm just not gonna adjust anything with the video, so.
Let's hope Justin's available.
So, he's not, so we're gonna have a little video, like a 1-year update, with the chief and the deputy chief. I just, select member Brady, asked us to do that. I think it's a great idea to give the community an update. So I'll have them both in on the 4th. And I think we'll also try to do a little update on Nero's, which is something very interesting. It's an update on, this is, I think everyone will find interesting. It's also an update as to, where we are. It's basically almost a year later now. So it's actually a good anniversary. So.
I just have a question about departmental budgets and where that is in the process of being reviewed.
The next Wednesday is the advisories all in on finance. So hopefully they'll have those all wrapped up. And then we can represent so basically the initial conversation we had about changed a lot. That said, we've made some really significant, the conversation with schools have been excellent. We have a good package. And we'd want to present the, you folks voted for the ARPA money for the curriculum. We found some additional funds to allow full-day kindergarten to go forward next year. Again, it's a one-time cost, so we wouldn't have to bake it into the budget. We're going to use some free cash for that. Recommend free cash for that. So there'll be a package of all that for you to look at. probably the 28th, I think, if we have this time down.
Could you, when the departmental budgets get sent out to advisory, could you share them with the select board at that time?
Yeah, and in fact, we have one-page sheets on all the budget, all the major budgets. Let me just share that with all of you so you have.
Just to give us some time that, I usually attend the advisory meetings because they're held by Zoom and they're a few feet away from me. So, it'd be nice to follow along.
So they really want, they've done police and fire. And now it's public works, facilities, IT, and then shared rooms. They're not getting into the weeds on some of the smaller ones. And like I said, they had a really good meeting in schools, and then we've been able to have some good conversations with Superintendent Sullivan and his team. And again, I think we have a really good combination. I think we've been able to really address some real meaty concerns from the schools on like big chunks like that curriculum. And also, I think going to full day kindergarten is a really big deal for the community. I think people really want to go that way. And again, I said that'll make the students also eligible in the following year for chapter 7. So we're excited that we think based on the information, it could very well pay for itself in the second, which is the reason it's only one-time costs. So,
This is kind of not your department, but because schools, is there any word about school lunches and funding for that? Continuing for next year?
that is not a conversation I have.
Okay, didn't know if that crossed your desk, is that the thing?
That's really, yeah, no.
Okay,
School parent here.
that's fine. It's your call. I wonder if you heard something. That's.
I will also say just one other update, just so you're all aware. So Congressman Keating's office reached out about applying for funding that might be available in not earmarks. They're not called earmarks. I don't know what they're called anymore, right? But they were only given a week. So I talked to a gentleman named Chris Matthews, District Outreach Director, last Friday, had a long conversation, and distributed materials to Chief Quigley, to Michelle, and to Brian Joyce. And we're going to be putting in some requests for water projects, because on the house side, it's really just water, sewer, and some cost technology. So we're going to do some water projects and also seek funding for the regional 911, some technical equipment. The senator's offices have unlimited asks, and they have more. So the Congressman's office can only make 15 plus for the district. So the senators got to do a lot more, and they're in the majority. And our senators have the majority in the Senate. So we're going to be plugged into Senator Markey's office, and hopefully seek this potential. Again, this is no to seek money for schools, potentially public safety, at least through emergency management, see what kind of funding might be available this year and the coming years. And to see if there's any money for this project. I mean, it's in the House side, the answer is no, we asked that. I mean, and there's several other disappointing committees that weren't able to do that either. That said, the Senate side, there might be something. So we're going to have this conversation in the next couple of weeks. And I really want to thank Congressman Keating's office for the outreach. So it was a nice phone call, and we're going to have Chris actually live in our situation, Chris Matthews, so he's going to come visit at some point, and with I think some of the senator's aides. So I will let any of you know if when we set that up. But I do appreciate that outreach. I think it's a good sign at the efforts that they're making to work with class.
Okay, that sounds great. Select board comments. Why don't we start with Mr. Creighton?
Well, Mr. Creighton was about to say, I'm losing my signal. So I have nothing further to say. And Jean, thank you very much. I appreciate that. A wonderful job. And I will see everybody later because I'm about to go blank. Okay.
Mr. Evans?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Mr. Grady?
Just in a nutshell, I'm looking forward to the road to sidewalk committee getting up, and just had a question to Tracy. It was suggested that maybe we could do a polling about getting out, getting people together, at least for the first meeting. And then you can start working instead of what. Thank you so much for your efforts, Brian. But if we do, one of those new members suggested some sort of polling. All right, so we get that, and but I think, again, I'm trying to emphasize that my thoughts about this meeting tonight, whatever we pass, I just think it has to have the most impact on the most people. I think that's some big things going on.
Ms. Kennedy?
I actually just have a question that I was thinking of. Do we have any idea what the state is going to do about the virtual and hybrid meeting?
The short answer is no. I'm hoping they're gonna do something because the current rules expire imminently. The last time they did an emergency extension of the prior one. I have not heard that they made any progress at all. That doesn't mean they haven't. So I think everyone likes this, and the consensus on the MMA committee that I sit on is that communities want to have this option. They just don't want to be forced to do certain things. Hopefully, we'll get answers soon.
And I have a call with Joan tomorrow, with Rep. Mosquito tomorrow, so maybe I'll ask her. She knows everything.
Yeah, I think on a related note, it would be great to get our state senator and state rep in part because, the governor is coming out with a new draft budget and that looks like it has some interesting items in it that may inform future discussions. And I think too, there was the millionaire's tax that was passed earlier that has money for roads and schools. So again, just having some update for us, for residents who are asking these questions would be great. And I did want to thank all of our town staff, who I know has been working really hard during this town season, as well as the volunteers on all of these committees who have just been putting in a huge amount of hours, which I think will pay off one way or another in terms of a lot of work we're trying to move forward this season. So, there's no topics that we reasonably anticipated within 48 hours at this point? Yes.
I can answer 2 questions that were asked, if that's okay.
On what topics?
On the topic of school lunch extension, meetings.
Sure. I think, typically select board comments are, we don't do deliberation on, but yeah.
Okay, so, my name is Ellen Morris, 60 Pasture Road.
Okay.
I'm still on the Massachusetts Association of School Committee email list. And so from their field director today, they said, both legislative chambers included an extension of the remote meeting legislation and their versions of the supplemental budget. Supplemental budgets when the conference committee for reconciliation, though both chambers did agree on this, it runs through March of 2025. This is also the budget that includes the current year FY23 extension of school lunch funding. The governor is committed to funding for lunches for FY24 and a future supplemental budget. It's not in the House One budget that was proposed earlier this month.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All right, Mr. Creighton?
You dropped off.
We are there.
Okay, you adjourn. Well, let's just do a voice vote because we're all here in person.
Aye.
Aye.
Apologies.
All right,